drop me a message when you've done that. Okay, Chair, we're live, so it's over to you whenever you're ready.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor George Gould and I'm the leader of Camden Council and the Chair of Cabinet. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Cabinet meeting, which is being broadcast live. We're going to start with a few introductions. Can I firstly ask our Chief Executive and Committee Officer to introduce themselves?
Good evening, I'm Jenny Rowlands and I'm the Chief Executive.
Good evening, I'm Vicky Weemscliff and I'm the Clerk to the Cabinet.
Other officers are in attendance and will introduce themselves when they give presentations or answer questions. Please can I now ask members of the Cabinet to introduce themselves, stating the name of your portfolio and confirming that you can hear proceedings. Councillor Merrick Apac.
Hi Georgia, it's Councillor Merrick Apac and I'm a Cabinet member for Better Homes. I can hear and see the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Danny Beales.
Hi, Councillor Danny Beales. I can see and hear proceedings. Our Cabinet member for Investing in Community Culture, Inclusive Economy.
Thank you. Councillor Pat Callahan.
Councillor Pat Callahan, lead member for Healthy and Caring in Camden, and I can see and hear the proceedings.
Brilliant, thanks. Councillor Abdul Hai.
Yeah, Councillor Abdul Hai, Cabinet member for Young People, Equalities and Cohesion, and I can hear and see the proceedings.
Thanks, Abdul. Councillor Adam Harrison.
Hi, Councillor Adam Harrison, Cabinet member for a Sustainable Camden. I can see and hear it.
Great. Councillor Angela Mason.
Councillor Angela Mason, Cabinet member for Best Start in Life, and I can hear and see proceedings.
Brilliant. Councillor Richard Olszewski.
Councillor Richard Olszewski, Cabinet member for Finance and Transformation. I can hear and see proceedings.
Great. Councillor Nadia Shah.
Hi, Councillor Nadia Shah, Cabinet member for Safer Communities with special responsibility for keeping and vibrant markets, and I can see.
We're losing you, Nadia.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Do you hear what I said, or should I repeat myself?
We lost the first part.
A few people not on mute, which I think might be making it worse.
Okay, if everyone just goes on mute, and then Nadia, if you just go again.
Councillor Nadia Shah, Cabinet member for Safer Communities with special responsibility for rough sleeping and vibrant markets, and I can see and hear.
Brilliant, we got that perfectly, thank you. Councillor Anna Wright.
Hello, Councillor Anna Wright, Cabinet member for Promoting Neighbourhoods and Communities, and I can see and hear.
Brilliant, thank you, Anna. The agenda can be found online by going to www.camden.gov.uk/democracy. All participants, whether if everyone just go on mute. Meeting. I think you just go on mute while we're just doing the introduction. Brilliant. All participants, whether members, officers or deputies, should keep themselves muted until such time as you are called to speak. I may ask our clerk to mute any persons where this is necessary to ensure a good audio quality and the effective conduct of the meeting. Members should keep their videos on throughout the meeting, even though you might not always be on the screen. Officers and deputies should keep their videos off until called to speak. Members, if you have a question or comment, please indicate that in the chat function on Microsoft Teams. If you lose your audio feed, you should also say this on the chat, or if this is not possible, send a message to the contact telephone number you have been provided with. Members, you must be present for all of an item in order to vote on it. Therefore, it's very important you notify us of any connection issues immediately. Please do not use the chat function for any other reason than to indicate that you wish to speak, to indicate that you have a connection problem, or to call for a vote. The chat function is only for the use by members and only for those reasons. Please note that the chat function is visible to all meeting participants. So moving to the formal agenda. Item 1 is guidance on remote meetings held during the coronavirus national emergency. Can we agree the remote meeting procedure rules are set out on pages 13 to 20 of the agenda?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 2 is apologies. I don't have any apologies for absence. Item 3 is declarations by members of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests in respect of items on this agenda. So I've seen Councillor High has a declaration.
Yes, Leader. I would like to declare a non-pecuniary interest in respect of agenda item number 12, as a member of my families who live in the region, in the state, Thibault State.
Thank you.
So and therefore I would not be taking part, to avoid any avoidance, I would not be taking part in the item.
Thank you, Councillor High. We'll note that. And does anyone else have any declarations they'd like to make? No. Okay, item 4 is announcements. Just have my normal announcement, which is in addition to the rights by law that the public and press have to record this meeting, I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being broadcast live by the council to the internet and can be viewed on our website for 6 months after the meeting. After that time, webcasts are archived and can be made available upon request. If you've asked to address the meeting, you are deemed to be consenting to having your contributions recorded and broadcast, including video when switched on, and to the use of those sound recordings and images for webcasting and/or training purposes. Do we have any other announcements? Okay, item 5 is deputations. I've agreed to hear a deputation from Sally Kellner in respect of item 10 on Real and Carlton schools. Sally, you will have 3 minutes to address the Cabinet, and the clerk will time you and will indicate when you have 30 seconds left, and then again when your time is up. After that, there will be a few minutes for questions from Cabinet members. The Cabinet member for Best Start for Children and Families will respond to your points when we reach the item. Sally, if you unmute now. You're just muted at the moment. There you go.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I'm not going to go through all the points because I believe you've had circulated the main points of my fourth deputation, I think. My 2 main points I want to stress are: the consultation is flawed, it was biased, it was unrepresentative. When the parents had their own school gate ballot, 97% of Carlton parents are against this merger. When you had your own second round of statutory consultation replies, all were against the proposal, none were in favour. And our children have already, up to this point, had their education disrupted over the years through no fault of any of us, but because of the pandemic. But now we should be concentrating on what each child is being, and we would like to see each child having an individual passport of how much they've learned this year, what they need to do to catch up individually, because children vary and the children's ability to cope with online varies. I now want to introduce, I don't know if Kat is there or otherwise Karina. These are parents whose children have been particularly badly affected. Kat, go on then.
Okay, so I have my child in year 1 who will basically be moving to the new site from September. It took her ages to get settled into the current school, and now she will have to be unsettled again and basically resettled again. It is very, very well, it's very nervous nervous experience for her, and she's been constantly upset. I understand that there is no support for a child of her age in terms of.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Hear you, Kat. We can hear you. I think all Cabinet. Can you hear? If you just nod. Yeah, we heard. Yeah.
Hester is quite a talented girl. I mean, she can read. However, she missed a year on her education. Her sister was also at this school, and she is actually accepted by the Camden Council as gifted and talented. She now is home educated. So for me, it will be a massive disruption to my
30
work
seconds remaining.
commitments because she will have to get settled again. I believe that there wasn't enough voice given to the parents in terms of trying to decide on decision making of this whole issue. I also think that it's poor use of resources.
Could we also have quickly, because a year 5 one, we need both
time.
Parents.
I'm happy for the other parent to briefly have a minute to speak.
Okay, thank you, Georgia. Chair. Go on, Kat.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Nothing new, but basically really just the missed curriculum bits. So what effects that's going to have on the child's learning and on the whole, you know, holistically on how the children are going to progress with what they have not been able to do in school in terms of the tasks they were supposed to be learning at this age. I haven't really assessed this yet. I have no idea. Has anybody else looked at what skills they should be mastering in year 5 by now, and how far off that they are? And then also the general health, the emotional, mental health, the emotional impact this whole hoo-ha has, you know, trying to settle here, then moving around, then potentially not getting on. There's already been some things about Carlton children not using the garden, and it doesn't feel like anybody was asking us, really, because the decision seems to have been superimposed. Yeah, nothing new to add. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you both, all three of you, for coming to speak and share those concerns about how the support moving forward, and that is much appreciated. Anna, I think you've got a question.
Thank you. Is it okay for me to ask a question to the deputies? Yeah. So it's really important that you have the support you need and your children have all the support they need for this transition, which is going to be challenging, and you've touched on that. So I just wanted to ask what support you would really like to see, and what support you think you need that you feel you're not getting and have not got, because that can surely be addressed.
Thanks.
Okay.
So I'm going to Kat first, and then the other parent. Kat.
Okay, so Hester is a very sensitive child. Because it took her such a long time to get used to and settle into this school, and now she absolutely loves it. She adores it. I don't know how it will affect and what kind of support, both educational and psychological, will she receive real. Also, she doesn't know whether she will be in touch with her current classmates. How will she integrate? She has missed out a year of education because of COVID, and now we're moving to a new site. It's all new to her, and for a 6-year-old, you can only imagine how scary it could be. So what support is there? How will she be supported? And also, I mean, how can us as parents be supported as well? Because all of us have all of these questions, and we have no say in any of this. How can we have a say? How can all of this be voiced? That's, I think, our main issue for most of us. And Sally, I'm sure, would agree, and so would Karina and Shoda and many of us. And this is my first time. When there was a time when there were discussions, it was in the morning, and I am working. I'm a single working mum of 3 little girls. There was only one time, I believe, where there was actually a consultation, and I couldn't attend because of work commitments. So I've missed that. Of course, when there was ballots, I voted against, because I believe that this school should carry on being as it is in the current setting and format, and it has been so for more than 100 years.
Thank you, Kat. I just want to bring in Karina as well. Sorry, Karina, I didn't have your name because it didn't come up on my screen. So, Karina, the question of what support would parents like to see at that point?
Again, this is something I can't really add any news to what Kat has been saying there. It's difficult for us to predict this. Myself as well. I've come in the door. I've started the laptop. I've attached the camera that I've just bought in between work and school runs. There is not enough time to even think of, you know, what do we want, what do we need. The Carlton side is where my daughter is used to as well. Lovely teachers, lovely building, you know, it's just, and it has such a nice energy, you know, that you get there and you feel safe, and then you have people that are talking to you on eye level that are just, you know, it seems like they're instinctively looking to meet the needs of the person that are coming in there. And I just didn't have that impression during the brief interactions I've had with rural school. And I don't know how this is going to work in terms of teachers, because I think a few of the teachers have already left Carlton because, you know, there's no clear who's going to go. Is there anything from Carlton that's coming over there? It seems to be really more a closure than, I mean, I don't know what the merger part is about, because it seems to be all, you know, from what I can see for year 5, it'll, you know, there'll be no difference because there'll be no teachers, there'll be no building. If she's lucky, she'll be in the class with a few of her classmates. I don't know. And even though everybody is trying their best to make it as easy as possible and to be as, you know, giving everyone time to prepare and adapt, it's just huge. You know.
Thanks, Karina. And thank you both for, I know what you've said is just such a really difficult...
Georgia, we have one proposal. Which
sorry, Sally, I think...
Can I just say the one proposal, please?
Okay, very briefly.
Right. For catch-up, we suggest that each child has a kind of passport, an assessment by their current teacher of where they've got to and what they did or they did not manage to understand and absorb with remote learning. And then a passport, the passport should also say, as they go forward, where they need to concentrate, so that the next year, particularly who their main teacher's gone, they've had a temporary teacher for the last half term. And I think a new teacher is starting this week, or next week rather, but they need to have something written down where they are in their education. So when they go so during year 6, these are plugged, and when they get to secondary school, they are on a level with others, and that despite all the upheaval, they are not disadvantaged. So we'd like that particularly for the older, but we'd like it for all the children. The parents need to know, because we haven't seen a curriculum map, what they've missed and how it's going to be done. Thanks.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you for those really constructive suggestions and kind of setting out some of the difficulties in the transition and the support that both children and parents will need, and making the time, all three of you, for being here to talk to us tonight. Councillor Mason will respond to the points in the deputation very shortly. I've just got to go through a little bit of business until we get to her item, but it will be like 3 minutes. So if you just wait for a couple of minutes. Item 6 is notification of any items of business that the chair decides to take as urgent. There aren't any notifications. Item 7 is representations received about why the meeting should be open to the public. No representations have been received about why the exempt information on the agenda should be considered in public. Item 8 is minutes. Is the Cabinet content to approve the minutes of a meeting held on the 24th of February as a correct record?
Yes.
Thank you. Item 9 is matters referred from a council scrutiny committee. There are no matters referred. And item 10 is determination of a statutory notice relating to the future organisation of Real and Carlton primary schools. And so Councillor Mason is going to respond to the deputation and introduce the item. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chair. This is a really difficult report to bring to Cabinet, because the proposal to merge Real and Carlton does mean that Carlton School will cease to exist as a distinct and separate entity. And that is absolutely no fault of the school. It is a good school, and it's well respected, and you've heard the parents speak highly of it, and it's well respected in the community. Carlton School is very much a victim of falling school rolls, caused primarily by a very steep drop in the birth rate in Camden, and probably exacerbated by high housing costs, unregulated Airbnb lettings. Many also fear that COVID will have an adverse impact on the number of families and children in the borough. The impact of falling rolls in the Gospel Oak and Haverstock area has been particularly severe. At Carlton, which is a two-form entry school, 51% of the places are unfilled, and the figure rises to 68% for reception. For Rill, the figures are respectively 28% and 31%. In these circumstances, the authority has a duty to ensure a sustainable school system. And as long ago as 2018, our schools are pressing very hard for new plans to mitigate the impact of falling rolls. In September last year, Cabinet will recall approving a consultation on the proposal to merge Rill and Carlton, and also to use part of the Carlton site for a new community hub with new community services. The results of that consultation were discussed by Cabinet in December last year, and the decision made to issue a statutory notice and seek representations. This report sets out the 32 representations made to this proposal, which are attached to the appendices, and asks members to consider whether or not, in the light of these representations, we should continue with the proposals set out in the notice. I'd like now to turn to a number of points raised by the deputation and that have been discussed more generally. Firstly, the issue of the validity of this part of the consultation. Notices were sent to all stakeholders who took part in the initial consultation. It was displayed in prominent locations. It was sent to all early years settings and all other local schools. Rill and Carlton schools sent letters to all parents, and this information was also shared by school texts and social media, and there was access to translated material. Copies of the notices were also published in the CNJ, which has contained prominent coverage of this issue over a number of months, and very many letters on the subject. There's also, as you heard, been a call from the deputies to delay any decision. I think this is difficult. It's been going on for a considerable period of time, over a year now. And I think further delay might jeopardize, in fact, not help the of children, both at Rill and Carlton. If the proposals are accepted this evening and the recommendations are accepted, there will then be an intense period with the heads, the very experienced heads of both schools, Rill and Carlton, working with parents on the futures of their children, what classes they'll be in, what friendship groups can be kept together, and any other issues that the parents may raise. This work will also obviously go on with the recovery work, which all our schools are engaged in now that schools are open again. A special choices officer will be appointed by the council to work closely with all parents. And for students and children who have educational and healthcare plans or have additional needs, there will be individual support from our special educational needs team. Sally raised the issue of the ballot, which has featured a lot in discussions about the future of these schools. I've said before that I perfectly accept that no parent, I don't think anybody actually wants to see the school closed, all things being equal. Unfortunately, because of the falling school rolls, all things aren't equal. However, I don't accept that nobody is in favour of these proposals, and I've been asked by the chairs of both Real School and Carlton School. And remember, the chair of Carlton School came to the December Cabinet to talk about her support for the proposals to merge the two schools and to create a community hub. Both head teachers, they're very experienced people with remarkable records of service to the community, are also supporting these proposals. I think it's important to say something about the teachers, because some teachers will lose their jobs. That is an unfortunate fact, which I think we all very much regret. However, some teachers will be able to transition to the new school, certainly for a period of time, to help children who, as one of the parents said, may be nervous about the transition to a new building, so that there will be teachers around who they know and respect. I'm also hoping that jobs, vacancies that arise within the Camden family of schools will be made available to Carlton teachers if they want to apply. Some Real School has also said that if there are any bulge classes, Carlton teachers will have first choice of application. I've also asked that very full HR support in terms of writing CVs or whatever is given to all the Carlton teachers. The difficulties and pain that will be caused by this proposal, I fully acknowledge that. But I think the proposal to create essentially a new merged school, to provide facilities, new community facilities on the Carlton site, will provide the best chance of providing excellent, sustainable primary education in this area. And I would ask you to support the recommendations.
Thanks, Councillor Mason. Are there any questions from Cabinet? Councillor Cooper, did you want to comment?
I did. Thank you very much. Thank you to the deputies for bringing this deputation, and to the representees that made representations as well, because this is fundamentally what this report is about, is making sure the Cabinet has considered those representations, and legally you have to. And I'm looking down them, I'm reading down them. I mean, as the report says, and there's no secret, there was unanimous opposition to the proposal in the representations. Every single one was opposed to it. And I'm looking at them, and some of them are quite detailed. There are a couple of pages of prose long, and some of them have appendices on top of that. So they're clearly not just objections for the sake of objection, but clear and meaningful feedback. Now, I've expressed before at previous Cabinet meetings that I think there should have been more information published, financial data on the schools, internal documentation that would have allowed parents and carers to put forward alternative plans. But the question is really, given where we are, I'm looking at that and I think those representations are probably about as detailed as you could get, as you could reasonably expect, and they were unanimously opposed. So maybe Councillor Mason can explain what further information or responses would have changed her mind on this subject, because, and you heard this from Kat and you've heard it from Sally, and I think Corinne said it as well, parents are losing faith in being listened to. I like Sally's proposal on pupil passports. I think it's great, but it needs to be listened to, and they right now feel they don't. So maybe you could explain what would have led to a different outcome on this.
Well, that's a hypothetical question. On the passports, I mean, as I've said before, the head teachers of Real and Carlton, they're both very good schools, and they are, I would say, exemplary leaders. I will certainly pass that suggestion to them, but they will be working, I am absolutely confident, very hard with parents and children to recover any lost ground which has been caused by the pandemic. There were 32 representations, one of which contained the signatures of 22 parents. We don't know really what why other parents didn't sign that. And I don't think it's terribly helpful, really, to speculate. In fact, I was recalling that when we faced the closure of St. Aloysius School for similar reasons, falling school rolls, there was something like 90 representations in that case. So the weight of representations is perhaps not as great as we've had in other schools. I would remind Councillor Cooper, though, that originally the proposal was to close Carlton School. And it was after discussion, a number of discussions, particularly with the parents, that myself and Councillor Gould took part in, that we thought we had to come up with a better proposal that would preserve as much as possible the spirit and ethos of Carlton, and allow children to continue to be educated as far as possible on the Carlton site. And it's for that reason we approached RIL and the proposal for the merger emerged. We've also taken account of the proposals to have a new Sure Start facility developed on the site, a facility that would have been developed at Gospel Oak Nursery site, but we think can be transferred to the Carlton site and to working with the new school. So I think we have taken account of people's suggestions and tried in very difficult circumstances to get the best solution that we can.
Thanks, Angela. And a question from Danny.
Thank you, and thank you to the parents for presenting tonight. I think we all appreciate, understand, sympathise with your position. You know, the changing nature of your child's education when they're in the middle or through their journey through a school must be very unstabilising to you and to your children. And moving between schools is always a transition that's challenging and has to be managed very carefully and closely, even when that's a supposed natural transition through stages of schooling. I remember moving between primary, actually middle school and secondary school, and those transitions were always challenging for me and my classmates and have to be managed closely. So moving between schools is certainly something that needs support. I guess that turns really to my question to Councillor Mason, is to manage this change, this process, what will we do in terms of additional investment to support the schools merge and come together? You talked about that close working of head teachers. How is Camden supporting that process? How are we resourcing that process? And you touched upon a sort of future life for Carlton being a community hub, a place where there is learning, there's education of all ages. What investment are we putting to make that happen as well?
Well, this Cabinet report would commit the Council to providing those facilities. And there is now a group locally within the community that's working with both schools and with officers to see what facilities they would actually like to be placed within the school, and that work is underway now. And there will be support for any capital improvements that have to be made to make that happen. The transition of some of the teachers, which has been proposed by the schools and which I think is an excellent idea, will also be supported by investment from the council. So there's a number of ways in which we're very happy to invest to make sure that there's as smooth a transition as possible.
Thanks. And a question from Anna.
Thank you. I was just going to a comment and a question really. Last year I was asked to do a piece of work to really look a bit. Sorry, I've got kids in the background making. Hold on. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was asked to do a bit of work to look a bit deeper into this phenomenon that we have in Camden of falling numbers of children in the borough, and which is, of course, the driver behind this decision, unhappy decision that we're having to make today. And you know, that situation is a very real one, and it is, as Councillor Mason said, about a falling birth rate. There are also many other factors, and I was trying to explore all of these, many other factors that in various and small ways are contributing to that situation. And we do have a fast falling number of children living and growing up in Camden, and it's something that we as a council need to do a lot of different things in every way we can to try and address. The major drivers are, of course, out of our hands in many ways, but there are multiple small interventions that we can make that can contribute longer term, I hope, to at least slowing, although it'll be very hard to reverse this trend. So I just wanted to comment that the context is that the external threat we face is a very real one, and that is what's behind this decision. I also wanted to ask, but actually Councillor Beales has already asked, for Councillor Mason to comment a little more on the positive side of this, which is the opportunities that now exist for new community services on the Carlton site, but I think that's been already covered.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wright. So I can't see any other questions. So if I can now ask the clerk to conduct a roll call of members to vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the Cabinet, when I call your name, could you please confirm that you've been able to hear this item, and can you then indicate whether you're for, against or abstaining on the recommendations set out in the report? Councillor Apac.
I've heard all the discussion and I'll be voting for the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Beales.
I saw and heard discussions. I'll be voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Callahan.
I've saw and heard all the discussions and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Yeah, I've heard the discussions and I'll be voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor High.
I've heard the discussions and I'm voting in favour of the recommendations.
Harrison.
I saw discussion. I'm voting in.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
I've obviously taken part in the discussions and will be voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Olszewski.
I've heard the discussion and I'm voting in favour of the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Shah. Sorry, Councillor, you faded out there. You're going to have to shout, I'm afraid.
I've heard the discussions and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Wright.
I've heard and I'm supporting the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Those recommendations are carried, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the people who came to speak to us this evening.
Yes, could I just add, Chair, that I hope they do settle well in the new school and that they have an excellent educational career. Thanks for coming along.
Yeah, well, there are lots more conversations about the support as we go forward. Okay, so then item 11 is the domestic abuse policy progress to date and action plan. And that is also a report of the Cabinet Member for Best Start for Children and Families. Angela, over to you again. Angela, you're on mute, I think.
I'm going to relax a bit then. I think this is quite a timely report, given the concern and response to the terrible murder of Sarah Everard. And I noticed that actually that yesterday, in fact, Refuge, which runs the 24-hour national domestic abuse helpline, said that calls in July and August to the helpline was 77% higher than in March 2020. And there was some very extreme violence and abuse concerned. They said 1 in 5 calls were about death threats, 10% of women ringing had weapons used against them, 16% had experienced strangling. And during 2020, Refuge made 4,481 referrals to other refuges. So the situation is still very concerning. This report this evening provides an overview in implementing the domestic abuse policy statement that the Cabinet agreed in January 2020. And the work will go alongside the inquiry that's on domestic violence and abuse that's been initiated by the Women's Forum, which will begin again, I hope, towards the end of April. As many people I think know, I was involved in setting up Camden's first refuge for women, and indeed the National Women's Aid Federation, which had its offices in Primrose Hill. That was almost 50 years ago, and although the refuge movement has grown and there are more measures to keep women safe, such as the MAREC, levels of domestic violence and abuse and male violence have not substantially, I think, decreased. I believe that one of the problems is that no one is really responsible or accountable, and I regret that there's no duty placed on local authorities or health authorities or police in the new bill, despite the very large number of cases that the Council, amongst others, is dealing with. This report notes that in 2019, our early help service dealt with 1,808 cases in 2020, and the Camden Safety Net, which is our bespoke service for domestic abuse survivors, dealt with 2,595 cases. The DVA is emerging as a strong feature in cases that are arising for children's service out of the pandemic. I think those figures are really quite extraordinary. They're very, very large. However, it is the case that a wide range of councils' activities and services can have an impact on domestic violence and abuse in relation to everything from prevention to support to enforcement. In particular, I think we can't stand by and see women and children having to flee their homes and the support of their families and community, while perpetrators remain in the community and in some of our tenancies. Camden, we give the council credit, has always invested heavily in DVA work, and in particular in Camden Safety Net, which has independent domestic violence advisors, or IDVAs, who provide support and interventions for all victims of DVA. So that includes men, it includes lesbians, it includes gay men and transgendered people. The new DVA policy supplements that work by engaging a range of council services has been put together by a working group of officers using the framework that's been developed for dealing with child sexual exploitation. That is, prevent, identify, support, disrupt and enforce. This report is not a finished product, but perhaps quoting Churchill, I hope that it's at least the end of the beginning. So I'll just mention some key features of the work. A new training and communications programme has been organised for all council officers, and new therapeutic and educational interventions are also being developed, which I think is quite an exciting strain of work. So there'll be new interventions to therapeutic interventions for children who've experienced domestic abuse, and non-violent resilient programs for young male adolescents in schools. The education strategy will also look at what further support can be provided to schools to deal with issues of male violence and gender equality. In November, Camden Safety Net also started a new community-based survivors group, HOPE, Healing Our Past and Evolving Group, that is meeting weekly at present and will in the future do much to inform our policy on domestic violence. Perhaps the most dramatic changes as a result of the policy have come in housing. Housing colleagues are developing a new housing domestic abuse policy so that domestic violence and abuse will not just be considered as a subset of harassment. The online housing register now includes references to DVA as an exemption to the need to have lived in the borough for 5 of the last 7 years. All cases of DVA survivors are being reviewed and, where appropriate, given the option of a direct offer. New DVA procedures are being introduced in April and being expanded to other housing providers from November 2021 to provide a multidisciplinary team, a cross-service officer group, to work intensively on housing needs, to make families safe and explore longer-term needs and support. From January this year, all new housing cases where DVA is identified will be reviewed in consultation with the survivor to explore whether it would be appropriate to take legal action against the perpetrator. Accreditation through the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance will also be applied for. There are a number of new initiatives on employment. A protocol has been developed to ensure that DVA survivors are prioritised for training and employment support through our excellent Good Work Camden Employment Hub. And in April 2020, the Council launched its own Addressing Domestic Violence and Abuse policy for Council staff to raise awareness, reduce stigma. It allows 10 days paid leave if needed. There are still lack of programmes for perpetrators. However, during the first lockdown, Camden officers played, and I think yourself, Chair, played a key role in providing accommodation in domestic abuse cases, and also, and importantly, developing an early intervention programme for perpetrators with families working with social services. The new Domestic Abuse Act will place new duties on the Council and the GLA to assess the need and provide refuge accommodation, and also introduce new orders, new court orders to provide protection both immediate and longer term. A key feature of future work will be to work more effectively with the courts and try and develop an enforcement policy that will protect women and children in their homes. And there's not very much work being done at the moment with the local courts, and I think further work and liaison will also be needed with the police. This new policy and the work that's been carried out really integrates domestic violence much more firmly within all the activities and interventions of the Council. There's always some risks with integration that you'll use the sharp focus and profile that we have had in the past. But I think the impact on improving women's lives and the lives of other domestic violence victims and challenging and preventing domestic violence far outweighs that danger. The work thus far has been a real team effort, and I would like to thank all officers involved and the continued work of the Camden Safety Deck. Overall, this review and the bringing together of a number of these new policies has been coordinated by Anne Turner, the Director of Safeguarding and Social Work. As you may know, Anne will be retiring after 40 years in Camden, and I very much hope that the work outlined in this report will be one of her lasting legacies. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Mason, for setting out what is, I think, an incredibly powerful and important piece of work, and also thank you to all of the officers for who've been involved with their leadership on bringing this together, because I know it was a cross-council effort. Oliver, did you want to comment firstly?
I did. I wanted to thank Councillor Mason for that very detailed report on what was a very detailed report and the work that's done on this, which has cross-party support. I'm pleased that the Domestic Abuse Bill, which also had cross-party support, passed the House of Lords today. It's referenced in paragraph 2.9 to 2.12 of this report. And that brings me on to sort of two questions. One is that the government's going to make regulations under the Act on accommodation programme and regulations and guidance on other matters. And the report notes that means there'll have to be a review of the accommodation element of this by, I think it's August. I don't have it in front of me, but I think August. So has the council fed in to the government on what those regulations or guidance should say, and will it? Because I think this work has been very good, and therefore as a result I would love the regulations nationally to reflect what Camden has done. So that would be a positive thing if we could do that, if we haven't thus far. And then two specifics. And one, the report states under, I think, paragraph 2.8, it states that that domestic abusers themselves may be ejected from their tenancies if they are council tenants. Sorry, that number might not be correct, Angela, so don't trust it necessarily, but it states that tenants might be ejected. Is that the strongest language we are legally allowed to use? Because I would like this council to be absolutely clear that, you know, as strongly as the law could allow, that if you are a domestic abuser, you will be kicked out of your premises unless the law requires Camden to keep you in those premises. So can you assure me that's as strong as possible? And the third one, sorry, I'm going on England's Lane. I'm not going to go into details because there might be confidentiality issues. There's a large number of people that were there because of domestic violence issues, and I'm glad they had somewhere. When they were removed or offered alternative accommodation, were each of the, and it's mostly women, but were each of the tenants and families in England's Lane asked about that situation? How was that addressed? Because there are very traumatic episodes like that that need to be dealt with carefully, and I would love to hear that Camden has a plan going forwards to make sure they are.
Thank you. Angela, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. On the discussion about the new requirements to estimate need for essentially refuge accommodation, which appear in the new Act, we did have early, I recall we had early discussions about that with ourselves, and certainly the GLA, who will be the body that actually have to, as I understand it, undertake those assessments, and it will be, I'm quite sure, quite a live issue. The difficulty with that approach, I mean, is some people may have heard Louise Casey on the Food Alliance Zoom that took place earlier today, and she was saying in relation to DVA, we've got to learn how to turn off the taps. We can't just have a situation where we create more and more refuges. We've got to be more successful in preventing it and finding better solutions, particularly for all victims, including women and children, who often are forced into exile, essentially. And their position in London is made more difficult by the lack of benefits for housing, meeting housing costs. So there are lots of issues to come to grips with. I am very anxious that we use our full legal powers in relation to perpetrators. Historically, tenancy law and the protections in law that are afforded to DVA victims haven't gone hand in hand, and there's still not complete synergy. But I'm grateful, for instance, to Councillor Merrick Apac for working with housing to ensure that wherever appropriate, action is taken against perpetrators, and they're not just left there to enjoy their tenancy. On England's Lane, my understanding is that advice and counselling was given to women and children primarily who had to leave the accommodation. There's their situation, the situation of women who are in temporary accommodation because of their experience of domestic violence is a very difficult one. And that's why I'm very keen that one of the, in a sense, principles of this new policy is that we do whatever we can where it is safe to keep women in the community where they have the support that they can enjoy much greater support and even live in their own homes. I don't know if officers wish to add anything to those points. They're slightly technical points.
If officers do want to come in, if you just indicate by putting up your hand so I can see. If not, I'm going to bring Pat in with a question.
Thanks. I'll jump in, and if they do want to speak, they can come after me, Georgia. I want to thank Anne very much for her 40 years in Camden. She's just been amazing, and you know, with Angela and Anne together, the two A's, they've just been exceptional, and this report's been exceptional, and I thank you very much, Angela and Anne and the whole team, because it was certainly needed. I think that when domestic violence happens, and it's a real scourge, as you say, the whole family except the perpetrator gets punished, and the children go through immense trauma. It takes years for them to get back to anything, to a normal life, and their educational attainment is rocked, their social life is rocked. And I just want to say I really welcome the therapeutic educational interventions for children. And I hope it just makes life easier for them, because this was something, you know, the whole family got punished for one person's really bad, despicable behaviour. So huge thanks.
Thanks, Pat. I know I saw Abdul had a question as well.
Thanks, thanks, Georgia. Just to say, look, this is really an excellent piece of work. It really puts victims and survivors at the heart of the work itself, and the plan is really comprehensive. And in a way, Councillor Mason is able to do work with across the council and have a more of a joint up approach, and something that which wasn't happening maybe in the past. So that's really will make a big difference. Even from my work around the Youth Safety Task Force, it was very clear that 90% of young people were involved in serious youth violence, either experienced domestic violence, substance misuse, or alcohol. And this trauma had left many young people scarred for life. And I think the work that you're doing, it's saving lives and giving young people and their family the support they deserve. And I really welcome the fact that in housing area that many women, because of housing, they're not able to escape, and as a result, they've been further victimized because of their circumstances. The fact that you've made quite a good progress around the housing, and one particular area where women who turn up as homeless are not again penalized. So if they've got allocation points, those points are reinstated. And I think this is a wonderful piece of work. I very much hope that across London and beyond, local authorities will learn from this.
Thank you. And Nadia.
I was really pleased to see the government had also strengthened the legislation around controlling all coercive behaviour. And as we know, we've had low reporting of domestic violence when we know that it's increased. And this has come timely as we come out of COVID as well. I hope that people will see that we are doing everything we can to support them, and that they'll come forward and report to us, so that then we can put into action some of our support strategies to help people get out of the misery that they're living in. So thank you, Angela, for bringing forward this report at this time.
Thank you. Angela, I'll come to you to sum up. And I forgot to if Andrew wanted to say something on the legal question that Councillor Cooper asked.
Yes, Leader, I'm more than happy to do so. I understand exactly where Councillor Cooper is coming from in terms of giving messages, etc. But of course, the issue of eviction and how we go about taking action, of course, is all subject to legal process and subject to us proving a case and taking a case. My view, therefore, would be that it would be wrong to have a policy which says will, when in fact we're subject to this process, and therefore I think it's pitched correctly.
Thank you, and thanks for raising. Councillor Mason, if there's any concluding remarks you wanted to make.
Well, thanks everybody for their comments. perhaps just to emphasise the work of the Women's Forum, which will be starting, because I think that will really keep us on our toes, and they will be hearing from survivors, and they'll be looking at best practice. So that's a very useful adjunct to the new policy developments that I've outlined. And I just also wanted to say that our senior officers have been Jenny and others have been very supportive of these changes, and I was very glad to see that the person from the senior management team who is going to be taking particular oversight of these new policies will be the Executive Director of Corporate Services, who of course is a man, and I think that sent out a very good and strong signal. So it's not going to be easy, and I think the report says we will come back to Cabinet, I think, in a year's time. But certainly, I think this gives us a good platform, a strong platform to go forward.
Thanks, Angela. And I just wanted to really thank you for your leadership of this agenda, because I know there's been a huge amount of work that's gone in over a long period to bring this together, and I think it really shows in a powerful agenda that I'm very proud that we're putting forward tonight. Vicky, we'll go to roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Members, when I call out your name, please confirm that you've heard this item in its entirety and indicate whether you're for, against or abstaining on the recommendations. Councillor APAC.
I've heard the discussion and I wholeheartedly support the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Beales.
I saw and heard the discussions and voted in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan.
I've heard all the discussion, Vicky, and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Gould.
I've heard the whole discussion and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor High.
I've heard the discussions and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
I've heard the discussions and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
I've heard and participated in discussions and voted in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Olszewski. Councillor Olszewski, are you still with us? Okay, I will come back to Councillor Olszewski. Councillor Shah.
I've heard the discussions and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
I've heard the discussions and I'm voting enthusiastically in favour.
Thank you. And Councillor Olszewski, are you there? Are you with us? Okay, it does look like he's still on the call. Councillor Olszewski, can you hear me? Okay, I think we may have lost Councillor Olszewski. Those recommendations are carried, Chair. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I've just lost my agenda for a second. I think that if the next item is tabled, so I'm going to hand over to Councillor Beales.
Thanks. I think Abdul's saying he's leaving. Abdul, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'll be leaving for this item, so if someone could let me know when to rejoin again. Thank you.
Oh, we will do. Thank you, Councillor.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor Gould. So we're presenting today proposals for the regeneration of Tybald's estate, and I sort of fully commend the report to members. Hopefully you will agree that it's really fantastic news in the current climate to be able to propose 28 brand new, all additional, generally affordable homes south of Euston Road in one of our estates for people on our housing waiting list. This scheme, Tybald's estate, I think we were at scrutiny last night, and Councillor Fulbrook, one of the ward councillors, reminded us this was actually one of the, well, not one of the first SIP scheme that was envisaged at the beginning of the programme, and it's felt a bit like Groundhog Day, I think, for residents and for officers involved, who've been toiling away, I think, to to get this scheme to a good place that's meeting residents' aspirations for the improvements of the estate, but also financially sustainable and stacks up. So we had a 2017 permission, which unfortunately at the time of going to tender for the contract was significantly over the original budget envelope. So officers and residents have since been revising the scheme, trying to get the best and most of the benefit from that scheme, and to find something which we can confidently move forward with residents on, and that's really brought us to you today. I think we're very confident that this scheme is financially resilient. We won't be repeating the sort of false starts of the past, and alongside the 28 additional new generally affordable social rent and living rent homes, we're also delivering on wider aspirations. So significant and brand new community hall space, which is fantastic. A significant estate-wide improvement. So 112 existing homes will get step-free access for the first time, which is incredibly important as residents age and have disabilities and have sort of accessibility issues to many of our existing properties. So it'll mean people can stay in their homes for longer. And other broader benefits in terms of solar panels, much better landscaping, new children's play facilities on the estate. So a huge amount of benefits for existing residents and new residents as well. I think we've had strong engagement throughout the process from residents and the Tenants and Residents Association, who's been a very close dialogue with. Ward members actually came to the scrutiny committee last night to speak in favour of the scheme, which is always a welcome thing. And we've had messages of support today received from residents. One of whom she's asked me to sort of mention it, as she said she would have come in normal times, but due to COVID couldn't be here tonight. And Maureen said that she hopes that we approve the estate regeneration tonight, and that there's been so many delays with the scheme, including for COVID, that tenants just really want the council to get on with it. So I think, as Maureen says, please can we get on with it? We build new council homes that are much needed. And thank you really to everyone who's been involved, particularly to Julia, who's here tonight, who's worked tirelessly on the scheme, old and new, and to officers. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take questions from Councillor Harrison and Councillor APAC. Sorry, Councillor Cooper, if you want to come in first.
Very kind of you. Thank you very much as Councillor Deal said, Julia and the whole team on this report. It's a real shame that we've got here, of course. Reduction from 66 affordable units to 28 is a reduction of more than half, which is a pretty big blow to the local area. And I'm concerned not just for the local area, but the precedent that it sets for the rest of the borough. Steve Adams mentioned this at housing last night. This morning we received the very welcome news that Camden refused permission to reduce the number of affordable housing units at 100 Avenue Road on the basis that it would be demonstrably worse for the area. And that was the test, and that was the explanation that was given in the report. Not that we would have refused permission if you'd come forward with this amended scheme, but this amendment of and by itself makes the scheme worse. And we need to be really careful if we're using that explanation to refuse planning permissions, to make sure that we also follow the same principles as an authority. And I'm not sure that we are, because here, hours later, Camden is doing exactly the same thing in its own development, while making the exact same argument that Essential Living shamelessly made earlier, that is to say necessity due to cost overruns, and that Camden refused. So I'm concerned that the decision made tonight, for the reasons spelled out in the report, contradict the refusal last night, and therefore strengthen the applicant on 100 Avenue Road's case legally, when they no doubt will bring, because they are litigious, an appeal against that decision. So I'm not sure a response is required on that, although perhaps legal can answer it if Councillor Beals doesn't want to. But the second thing is on paragraph 2.13. So I'll ask the second one and then come back to Danny. Sorry, thank you for indulging me in this. Paragraph 2.13 states that £5 million had been spent on the previous scheme, which is obviously a large amount of money. And then paragraph 7.5 states that the development cost has been, quote, considerably reduced but doesn't quantify it. So could maybe Councillor Beales or one of the officers quantify that? How much of the cost of this revised scheme has that been reduced by because of the preparatory works of the previous scheme, and therefore as a consequence how much of that 5 million is lost because of the miscalculation of the cost in the previous consensus scheme?
Councillor Beales.
Thank you very much. If Councillor Cooper were at scrutiny last night, he'd have heard my answer to Councillor Adams, but
it's a lot.
I don't blame him for not wanting to go to two meetings and 2 evenings, but
I did watch it. I did watch it.
Okay, great. Well, you'd have heard me respond, and I'm surprised you asked a question because I think they're completely different schemes and different propositions. If I think the residents of Belsize had a central living being proposed, a 50% genuinely affordable scheme with a new community hall with massive investment in the local community, they would have jumped at the chance to have that development. But that wasn't on the table, and it wasn't on the table with the original scheme that Camden rejected and the government approved on appeal. And Camden again rejected last night an amended scheme removing affordable housing. These are completely different schemes. What Camden is proposing here as a Camden-led scheme is a policy compliant scheme with 50% generally affordable housing and significant community investment. Yes, it is not as comprehensive a scheme as before, but that doesn't mean in future we can't add back elements of the scheme which we're not taking forward. The previous permission was looking at overbuilds on a number of buildings, additional building sites. It's not as an extensive scheme, and therefore we're not building as many homes. But in future, if this government decided to properly fund councils to build, we could of course take forward those additional elements. But I think making comparisons between 100 Avenue Road and Tybalds are frankly ludicrous. They're completely different propositions. And this council rejected 100 Avenue Road. It's a shame the government didn't have the chutzpah, I was going to say something else there, didn't have the chutzpah to stand up to the developers. Luckily, Camden has stood up to them again and said, no, you can't proceed without building affordable housing. On your second question about viability, the costs, I think the report touches upon this. So luckily, the vast majority of the architectural work, the design work has been reused. So I think as part of the revised plans, it's actually a very small proportion of additional financing that's been needed. I mean, Julian officers could correct me, but I think it's in the ballpark of about £200,000 or £300,000 of additional work that's been needed to get the revised proposals. So the vast majority of the work to date has been reused. Many of the buildings are the sort of same design and structure to take forward. So I think rather than losing the financing, we've sort of built on that work and built on the work we've done to date with residents.
Great. Councillor Harrison.
Thanks. My question really follows on from the words you just said there, Danny, about the work you've done with residents. I mean, it is really excellent to hear and see all the development that the way in which you brought the project forward over many years and the new elements that are going in. I'm sure we all agree with Maureen about wanting to bring it forward as soon as you can. But could you say a bit more about the work you did with the residents and the way that you engaged with them and how that fed into the kind of emergent proposals?
Great, and I've got a comment from Councillor APAC.
Thanks, Chair. Look, when ward councillors and residents line up to support a scheme, I think it's time for us to say, yes, we are going to support you and we're going to get on with it. And that's the case here. I just want to say I take my hat off to Councillor Beales and officers for their relentless hours and hours and hours of engaging and working with the local residents to make this a reality. Well done, Danny. Well done, officers, Julia in particular. Yeah, I'll be supporting this scheme.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Beales, any concluding comments? Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you very much. Just very quickly, I remember going down to Dobson House when it was opened, and the council had built a kitchen there for them, which was out of this world, so that the Tenants and Residents Association could actually do catering for parties, weddings, etc., and get some money in for the association. I mean, you know, absolutely brilliant. So I share Maureen's excitement down there. And if Tyballs is anything like that, I'm really envious of people who are going to be living down there. So, Danny, I wanted to ask, what is the level of government support for council house building? Is there now greater support for projects like this?
Danny, any concluding comments to answer Pat's question?
Sure, I'll be very brief. Thanks, Pat, Merrick and Adam for your positive comments. And actually, Pat, you'll be pleased to hear that the same architect actually who worked on Bourne and that hall are currently working on this proposal. So good work to build on, and absolutely just as high quality, which is fantastic. I think unfortunately the short answer is very little support. Not much has changed for many years since the community investment programme has been running. We're, you know, when obviously we took control of the council, the national government changed at the same time, and they significantly cut affordable house funding. I think at the time it was about £200,000 per council home was supported by the government. They cut that, and we're only just still up to £100,000 of grant being available for some council homes. So a fraction of the cost really. I think the total investment that we're making via SIP, only about 7 to 9% is national funding. So the vast majority of funding we're having to raise ourselves still, and even very small changes we're asking for take years and years to materialise, like the right to buy reforms, and even then they're sort of half cooked and nowhere near enough. In terms of Adam's question about community engagement, I think Julia and the team have really relentlessly, as Merrick said, you know, pursued the scheme, have worked with residents time and time again, worked to really build and keep trust after the full start. You know, a whole range of different methods. I think, you know, every resident has had newsletter updates delivered regularly through the door. We've had workshops, online Zoom sessions with the architect during COVID. You know, you name it really. And I think some really fantastic engagement. So over 100 households have been engaged with, over 30 residents off the estate have been engaged with. So really high levels of engagement. I know the TRA have been very closely kept involved. You know, Abdul's worked very hard locally. I know cares very passionately about the estate and has set us some really high expectations and tasks. And I think we're very pleased that we're meeting, I think, many, if not all of those expectations, and are very committed. I know Julia's very committed to continue to work as we move through to the next stage with the local community.
Thank you, Councillor Beales. Vicky, if we can go to a roll call on this.
Thank you, Chair. Just to remind members, there is a Part 2 appendix to this report, which I assume you've all seen and taken into consideration. So bearing that in mind, when I call your name, can you please confirm that you've heard the whole of the item and indicate whether you're voting for, against or abstaining on the recommendations in the report? Councillor APAC.
I've heard all the item and I'm voting for the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Beales.
Thanks. Yeah, I heard and voted for.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan.
I've heard all the item and I'm voting for.
Thank you. Councillor Gould.
I've heard the item and I'm voting for.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
I've heard the item, I'm voting for.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
I've heard the item and I'm voting for.
Thank you. Councillor Olszewski.
I've heard the discussion and I'm voting for.
Thank you. Councillor Shah.
Heard the discussion and I'm voting for.
Thank you. And Councillor Wright.
I've heard the discussion and I'm voting for.
Thank you. Those recommendations are carried, Chair. Thank you.
So I'm just going to give Abdul a second to come in back into the meeting.
I think he's back, Chair. Councillor High, you're back, aren't you?
Thanks. So we back to Councillor Beales for the procurement strategy for sales and marketing contract, the sales and marketing contract for the delivery of private residential sales units. Councillor Beales.
Thank you very much. Possibly not as exciting titled as the previous report, but important nonetheless. So just a brief overview for members. This is a contract for sort of estate agent type services for sales and marketing of the private sale units as part of SIP. Obviously, we build private homes on which to fund new council homes, new living rent homes, and the significant broader community improvements, many of which we've just discussed as part of the tie board scheme. Our existing contract is coming to an end. We're proposing to continue with a mixed model. So we have in the last couple of years developed an in-house sales team and capacity, and I think Chris is with us today, who heads up the team. And that's really been a positive, I think, change. Having that in-house capacity has meant much better oversight and management of the contract, much better contractor performance, and we've sort of grown that team really, particularly around managing our private rented sector pilot. I know the team have been very closely involved in letting, marketing and supporting new tenants moving into those homes. So our proposal is really to continue with that model of an increased in-house capacity, and then drawing on a estate agent type external contractor to provide the sort of more marketing and sales expertise for those private sale units. It's a sort of multi-year contract with the option to extend, and it's a non-exclusive contract as well. And just to be clear, it's actually no direct financial payment. It's a commission-based contract, so very much performance-based. Whoever is successful in gaining the contract, but happy to take comments or questions.
Councillor Cooper, is your hand up for this item?
Sorry, yes, it is. Just very quickly on this. Yeah, I think it's a fine recommendation, to be honest, but I think it would be useful to understand the balance between, obviously it's a commission-based contract, but there'll be some direction and target set because it is a mixed model by the council. I think that's one of the selling points of it. However, that might mean that the revenues received by it are reduced to meet other pressures such as timing, etc. Can you assure the cabinet and myself that pressure that might lead to a diminishing of receipts is going to be minimal?
Councillor Beales?
Yeah, no, I think certainly. I think that we have set targets. We have certain inbuilt flexibilities on sale values, and any decision to vary from that has to be agreed internally by the council and our decision-making processes that oversee the programme and monitor its performance. I think we're very clear. We set the direction and the limits in which the contractors have to work within. They don't have the discretion to make deals outside of that. It's very much directed by us and our expectations. We'll seek their advice when setting those sorts of estimates, but it's certainly a decision that we take around the cost and fees. I hope that answers your question, but if misunderstood the nature of your question, then I'm happy to clarify.
I think it broadly does. Thank you.
Thank you. So I can't see any other questions. So Vicky, I think we can go to a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Members, you know the drill, so I'll go straight to Councillor APAC, please.
Heard everything and I'm supporting the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Beales.
Yep, I heard and voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan.
I've heard everything and I'm voting for.
Thank you. Councillor Gould.
I heard the discussion and I'll be voting for.
Thank you. Councillor High.
I've heard the discussion. I'm voting in favour.
Councillor Harrison.
I heard the discussion and I'm in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
I heard the discussion and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Olszewski.
I heard the discussion and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. Councillor Shah. Thank you. Councillor Wright.
I heard the discussion and I'm voting in favour.
Thank you. Those recommendations are carried, Chair. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And our final report is the Camden's annual complaints report, which is a report of the borough solicitor, and Andrew's going to introduce it.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Yes, this is the annual report concerning complaints across the council. As the report indicates, it went to RCP scrutiny yesterday evening, and we had a very constructive and interesting debate on the details of the report. In fact, it will lead to us next year feeding in further parts of our information that we have. I think there was some very creative thought around how we look at what we do in terms of member inquiries and questions about what is a complaint and how do you define it. The whole purpose of this is for us to learn, really, to learn from when things go wrong, to let this inform how we go about our business, and we're looking to add in further data as our systems for collecting data become better and better. It's brought here for information for you to note, particularly around the Ombudsman, parts of how this is dealt with. And as the report makes clear, while it's quite difficult to compare across councils, because councils don't necessarily report all their data in the same way or perhaps as openly as we do, our complaint levels appear to be reasonable, to be what one would expect. But the difference perhaps is that we are incredibly open to learning from them and letting them feed into our policy development. So that was all I was going to say. It's a matter for noting.
Thank you very much. Councillor Olszewski?
Yeah, it's a very useful and interesting report. I'm sorry I wasn't able to make the discussion at scrutiny last night, but obviously really pleased that scrutiny is taking place, and very useful it sounded as well. All I would really add to Andrew's comments is just although you would look at the report and you would perhaps get taken aback when you look at some of the examples and the figures and so on, but it's also important though that, and it's mentioned in the report, that in a way we should welcome complaints because they are a means of us learning where we're going seriously wrong, of course, but also where we're perhaps more generally going wrong. And therefore what's important is obviously to redress the serious wrongs and so on, but then look at how we can draw lessons from the whole complaints process to bring in improvements. And you can see that in just the summary of some of the individual cases where you go from redressing the complaint to then following through recommendations to amend services and so on. And the figures, as Andrew says, it's difficult to make comparisons with lots of boroughs, but it's important to bear in mind the scale of the council's operations that generate these figures. And it's interesting in the report about how we have in housing we handle 200,000 calls for repairs, 300,000 in 2020, and in parking we issue 250,000 penalty charge notices, 100,000 parking permits, and more than 1 million cashless parking transactions. And our sort of overall complaints seem to be roughly steady at about 1,000. That's not to take away from the serious failings of the council, but it's just to kind of give us a sense of the scale of where we do fall down, because we also do get positive responses from residents and service users about how we're doing. But this is a useful report, and in a way I'm not so much interested in making comparisons with other boroughs, but I think what we do is that year by year and day to day as well, we make comparisons with ourselves and that we're constantly trying to improve. So, but thank you for that report, Andrew.
Thanks, Richard. Councillor Cooper?
Thank you very much for this. I saw the discussion at RCP last night. It was very useful. Following up something that Councillor Parkinson said about the distinction between almost positive reasons why the number of complaints have gone down and negative reasons why they've gone down. Because I completely agree with Councillor Zewski. Complaints are good if people feel empowered to raise concerns and those concerns get addressed at the first stage. It's a good thing, but it's hard to distinguish those things from when complaints are just not resolved. And I'm looking at the sort of the stage 2 complaints. And in the most recent year, the number of complaints upheld, the raw absolute number, increased by 50%, and the percentage increased by 200%. So, which suggests that the number of complaints fell for some reason that's outside the scope of the services improved. So it would be really useful for us to do a piece of work explicitly about that. I know that officers said that we do look at trying to work out whether people are satisfied with the complaints process, but really drilling down, maybe it's only for 1 year, whatnot, on whether people are not taking things forward to stage 2 or the ombudsman because they're satisfied, or whether they're doing it because they don't know how to, or because they think it's hopeless or whatever, because those two are very different residents' experiences. So I think we need to differentiate the two. It doesn't do it in the report, but it'd be useful if maybe that's reflected in future.
Thank you. And we bring in Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I just wanted to add my voice to the point that's actually now been made very forcefully, that I welcome the spirit of learning that's embedded in this report, and it's obviously been fully discussed in other forums, but feedback is a gift and we need to use it in that way and in that spirit, and I hope that and in that light I think this report is a great improvement on the tone of last year's, and I hope that direction of travel will continue, and I thank you for it.
Brilliant, thank you. Andrew, if you want to respond.
Only very briefly to both comments, really. I do hope that it is in the spirit of listening and welcoming these comments and learning from them. Councillor Cooper's comment, quite right, we did have an interesting discussion about this. Why don't people go on to the second stage? The point I made at the meeting, and I'll make again now because I think it's a valid point, although it's not a conclusive point, is that actually the big step for people normally is to complain in the first place and get into the system. What we have done is made our system incredibly simple. So it's actually not very difficult to go from one stage to the next. So I doubt it is reluctance, but we will look into that because it's interesting to know. And the other point I did make yesterday, which we encourage, and our complaints manager, Jim Reid, is very keen on, is we don't give up on these things. So just because someone's in the complaint system, what we don't do is put the shutters up and become all defensive. We will continue to try and settle this complaint. And it may well be settled, oddly, between the first stage being upheld, being knocked back, if you like, and the second stage. We continue that negotiation, we continue that dialogue. So it's quite often the case that we can settle these things outside of the official process. But we will look into that because I think it's one of the many interesting areas that RCP brought up yesterday.
Thank you, Andrew, and absolutely echo all the points made about the importance of continuous learning. So thank you. I think this is just for noting, so we're not doing a roll call on this item. So that leads us to item 15, which is any other business that the chair decides to take as urgent, and I don't have any urgent business. So I hope everyone has a good rest of the evening. Thank you so much for being part of the discussion tonight.
Martia, could you end the live stream, please?